Hey everyone, my name is Angelica Rubio, representative for District 35, and this is a brief legislative update. There's a few things that I wanted to update you all on. First and foremost, some folks have been asking about the housing package that myself and Representative Romero introduced yesterday. It was two things. So one was a bill to repeal language that's pretty antiquated that would have allowed local jurisdictions to issue rent control. There's currently legislation around a statewide that doesn't allow local jurisdictions to be able to do that. So one of the pieces of the bills would have repealed that. The other bill was to allow to give the legislature the ability to change statute to give the governor authority or power to issue a moratorium on evictions. This was a really important issue for me because as many of you might know, I've done a lot of work both in organizing and in advocacy, and housing and consumer protection is really where I got heavily involved in my outreach or in my organizing when I was living in LA and doing a lot of work around foreclosures. But during that time as well, I was doing a lot of work around tenant rights. And what we're seeing with COVID-19 is this incredible loss of income because of folks not being able to go to work. And while unemployment benefits have been incredibly helpful for many, that is going to expire at the end of July. And so what's going to happen to all of these people who have been on unemployment and are no longer getting this unemployment and are no longer able to get their jobs? Meanwhile, they have to pay their rent. And so there's a lot of predictions that over the course of August, September, October, November, we are going to see this incredible increase in evictions and homelessness. And as many of you may know, that there's a ton of consequences for a person to lose their shelter. One, it reports poorly on your credit report if you're evicted. And secondly, if you have young children or teenagers and they're all going to public schools, if you're having to move, it completely disrupts their education as well, and it's super complicated. Anyways, we were not able to get the governor to put it on her call, and so because it wasn't put on her call or on the proclamation, it means that we couldn't debate it. And so it's going to be really hard for a lot of our folks, and so that's giving me a lot of pause. It's giving me a lot of anxiety, I will say, because of that situation. We did pass the budget out of the House today, and it's heading to the Senate tomorrow for a vote. Many people are concerned with cuts, and this is where it gets a little tricky because the way that it's being described here at the legislature is not a cut. It's called sanding. And what that means is, for example, and I don't have any hard numbers on me right now, like I don't know them off the top of my head, but let's say that there's a department that had an increase during the budget that we did in February. There was we gave them an increase, right? So like, let's say they had been at a flat budget for 2 or 3 years, because for many departments they were flat. And then suddenly, because we had all these revenues, we decided to invest in these departments because things had been going so well. So we gave them this increase. Sanding is what is reducing that extra money that we were so it's getting them closer back to being flat, is what that essentially means. The only departments that were left out of that was PED, which is the Public Education Department. Medicaid shouldn't be impacted as well. and then there's one third one that I can't think of right now, but that is then going to the Senate. I almost voted no for it today because there was a $1 million item related to private prisons that I really did not believe that it should go to private prisons. I believe that we should ban them, especially on a day like today when we're discussing the Juneteenth and the end of slavery. I believe that mass incarceration is another version of that. And so to be funding private prisons seems incredibly wrong. And so I brought that up to folks in the governor's office, and it turns out that they were very welcoming in hearing me out, and so we're having conversations around making sure that that money isn't spent on private prisons, that if they're going to use that $1 million, that it go to fill gaps in the Department of Corrections, which I'm not entirely happy about either. But it's better than private prisons at this point, and there's some agreement. There's some agreement around having a meeting after the special session and talking about legislation which I've introduced in the past, but to really consider doing a moratorium on private prisons and pushing that legislation in 2021, so next January. And also looking into a transition plan to move away from private prisons here in New Mexico. So that was good. And I'm sorry that this is taking so long, but I wanted to share all of this information because I think it's important for you all to understand that there are a lot of moving parts happening right now in the House and the Senate. Special sessions are held specifically for budgets. And there's a lot of debate on what bills we're actually hearing, and I welcome those conversations because I personally feel like there's time we could have better spent, and then that's it, right? So I just wanted to share all of that information. There's a few bills that we're going to be voting on that we're still on the floor for, and then we're gonna come back tomorrow. So with that, I will talk to you all soon. Good night.